The shirt we've made for this character is looking pretty flat. That's because it doesn't have any wrinkles or other details that an actual shirt would have. We can add some wrinkles by using the cloth brush. The cloth brush requires a lot of computer processing power, so we should free up as many resources as possible before we try to use it. The best way to do that is to change away from our material preview mode to solid shading mode. For clarity in this demonstration, I'm going to change my viewport background to white, just so you can see a little bit better, but that's completely optional. With this shirt selected, we should switch our interaction mode into sculpt mode, and then activate the cloth brush. And let's widen the sidebar so we can see what we're doing. The cloth brush is highly customizable, so it's important that we get our radius, strength, and all of our cloth settings set correctly so that we have expected results. Because we're going to be sculpting on the front of the shirt, let's check the radius. The radius should be approximately the size of the shirt itself, so let's try a radius of 75 pixels. And now the radius fits within the size of the shirt. For the cloth settings, let's change the simulation area to dynamic, the deformation to drag, the force fall off should be set to plane. We'll leave the cloth mass at 1, and we'll set the cloth damping to 0.8. Cloth simulations will run faster, and they will look more realistic if we turn off symmetry. So let's come up here to the top and disable the X symmetry. And the last thing to do before using the brush would be to hide the hair so that it's not visually in our way. We can come over to the hair collection and click the eyeball. And now we can try using the brush. Let's start from the center and drag out towards the shoulder. As we drag, watch the wrinkles appear and start to get pushed out towards the shoulder. Let's do that again, but from the center out to the left shoulder this time. And there we go, wrinkles on the shoulders. If your results don't look like this, you may need to adjust the brush radius to affect a larger area, the strength to be more or less intense, the cloth mass to treat the cloth as heavier or lighter, or the cloth damping to slow down some of the polygons of the cloth as it moves around so that it doesn't explode outwards. But in our case, these settings worked just fine. These wrinkles are looking pretty good on the shoulders, but the front of the shirt has ended up very flat. Let's try a different deformation type to add wrinkles to the front of the shirt. Let's set the deformation to pinch point and change the force fall off to radial. With these settings, the simulation will behave a little bit differently. We're going to drag from left to right and then back to the left. Touch down, drag to the right. We can see the wrinkles appearing. And we can drag back to the left, swooping down a little bit. And maybe back to the right until we get a pattern that we're happy with. This is looking great, but if we orbit around to the back, we'll see that the back of the shirt has no detail yet. Let's change our deformation type to expand, and then drag over the areas that we would like to add wrinkles to. Dragging with the pen, simply just dragging back and forth across the surface until we're happy with the results. Perfect! Now the shirt has plenty of wrinkles. The trouble is it looks a little bit jagged around the edges, so if we want to smooth that out and create a more cloth-like appearance, we can add a subdivision surface modifier. We'll go to the modifiers, add modifier, subdivision surface, and one level of subdivision is plenty, so let's leave this at 1 and change render down to 1 as well, just so that they match. And now we have a pretty smooth, nice looking piece of cloth. If that's too wrinkly for your tastes, you can always use the smooth brush or the smooth mesh filter to reduce the intensity of those wrinkles. To create the collar for this character's shirt, we're going to start off in edit mode, use the extrude tool to create geometry for the collar, then we will create face sets that we can use alongside the cloth filter. Because we're going to be using face sets and masks, let's go to our viewport overlays and make sure that face sets are enabled and that masks are enabled. Without these, we're not going to be able to see what we're doing. While I'm here, I'm also going to change my viewport shading so that the background is set to white, just for sake of clarity in this presentation. Since we're working on the shirt again, I'm also going to hide the hair collection so we can see the shirt. And we have one issue, which is that the subdivision surface modifier that we've applied to the shirt is going to conflict with the mask display. So we're going to go to the modifier tab and click on this little viewport display icon here to disable the subdivision surface modifier in viewports. That way we won't have any issues with the masks that we're going to create. Alright, now we can create the geometry for the collar. We'll do this in edit mode. So with the shirt selected, we'll change our interaction mode to edit mode. Then we'll zoom in on the collar. And we'll change our selection type to edges up here in the top left. Holding down Alt, we can select entire edge loops. So hold down Alt and click on the perimeter of the neck hole, and that will select the entire edge loop that surrounds the neck. Now we'll grab the Extrude Region tool and pull upwards to create the geometry for the collar. Feel free to make this as tall as you like. Next, we'll use the Scale tool to shrink it down. We'll click inside this white circle and we will shrink it down evenly. Remember that we're working in 3D, so we need to check from all dimensions and see how it looks. We can see that it's actually peeking through the front of the neck. So let's use the green handle to widen it a little bit. Use the red handle to narrow it a little bit. And then we can use the Move tool to adjust it a little bit more and scoot it in front, just so that no part of it clips through the neck. That's looking pretty good, but just a little too tall. So right about there. Perfect. Now we're going to create the face sets for the collar. So we'll go into Face Selection mode. Again, hold down Alt and click on one of the faces of the collar. This will select the entire face loop that surrounds the collar. Then we will change the interaction mode to Sculpt mode. And from here, we can create a face set from the Face Sets menu and choose Face Set from Edit Mode Selection. And that will create a new face set and give that face set a color. We actually need a second face set here, so we're going to go back into edit mode and then choose Select, Checker, Deselect. And this will deselect every other face in the face set. To customize this further, we can open up the Checker Deselect options down here. And we're going to set Deselect to 2, set it deselects 2 at a time, and then set Selected to 4, set it keeps 4, throws away 2, keeps 4, throws away 2, keeps 4, throws away 2, and repeats that pattern around the entire collar. We'll go back to Sculpt mode, and once again we'll choose Face Sets, Face Set from Edit Mode Selection. And now we've got the pattern for our collar. Now we can use these face sets to create a mask. Hover over the face set that we would like to use for a mask. In this case, it's going to be the thicker purple one. Then hit Shift A to begin using the Mask Expand operator. As we drag, we can create the mask, but in this case, since we already have the face set, all we need to do is hold down Control, and it will automatically snap the mask to match the face set that we are currently hovering over. With this face set highlighted, simply click to confirm the mask. Now that we have our mask, we can use the cloth filter to inflate the collar. Let's scroll down on the list of tools until we find the cloth filter. Change the filter type from gravity to inflate. We could start using the filter right away, but right now our viewport is cluttered up with masks and face sets. For these kinds of operations, it's helpful to temporarily turn off viewport overlays simply by clicking the Show Overlays button. The mask and the face sets are still there, we just can't see them and they're not in our way anymore. And now we can try the cloth filter. Click anywhere in the viewport and drag to the right. The further to the right you drag, the more inflated the cloth will become. That looks pretty good right there. Now that that's done, make sure to turn viewport overlays back on. We'll change our interaction mode back to object mode, and we can re-enable our subdivision surface modifier. That's looking a lot better. We can also add a little thickness to the shirt with a solidify modifier. Click on Add Modifier and choose Solidify. That adds just a little bit of thickness around the rim of the collar. And we're done. We can unhide the hair, change our viewport back to Material Preview mode, and zoom out to admire our work. To create a shirt that's compatible with cloth simulation, we can start with a plane and then use our edit mode tools, such as Loop Cut and Extrude, to form a shirt pattern that can wrap around the sculpture. We'll go to the Add menu, choose Mesh, Plane, and then adjust the Add Plane settings. If it's not open by default, click to expand it, and then we will change the location X to 1. We will leave the location Y at -0.9 and put the location Z to about 7. That will lift it up here, slightly offset to the right. And then we'll set the rotation X to 90, so that the plane aligns with our view. And let's rename the plane to shirt. We can double click up here in the outliner and type shirt. Moving forward, we're going to have difficulty visualizing this because the shirt object is gray and the mannequin object is gray. So let's add a material for the shirt. We'll go to the Material tab, hit New. We can rename the material to Shirt, and we can scroll down past the surface all the way down to the Viewport Display option, and we can give this a custom color. Click on the swatch, and we can either pick from the color picker, or we can type in a hex code for an exact value. 6AADE7 will give us a nice light blue color, but feel free to use any color you'd like so long as it's visually distinct from the mannequin. Now that we can see a little bit better, let's continue working on the shape. Because we moved the location of the object, we can see that its origin point is over here to the right side of the character. We should reset this origin point so that it's centered up in the scene. We can do this by going to Object, Apply, All Transforms. And that will move the origin back down to the center while leaving the polygons of the shirt in place. And now that the center's been fixed, we can add in a mirror modifier. Go to the Modifiers tab, Add Modifier, Mirror. The object will be mirrored around that center point. The mirror modifier has an option to make sure that all of the vertices along the center of the object stay at the center, and that option is called clipping. So let's turn that on right here. Now we can go into edit mode, and the vertices that are on the center line will stay at the center line because of the clipping option. Now let's try to get the shirt to fit the shape of our guide. Select the Move tool, and we can move down and to the left until this bottom right corner fits approximately into the shape of the guide. Then let's make sure we're in edge selection mode. Select this topmost edge and pull it down so that this corner approximately aligns with the armpit of the shirt. Next, we'll use the Extrude Region tool, and we can click and drag anywhere on here upward until we touch the base of the collar of the shirt. Next, let's form the sleeve. We can select this upper right edge here, and again use the Extrude Region tool to pull outwards for the sleeve. Now we need to fix some of the placement of our vertices, so we'll go into Vertex Select mode, activate the Move tool again, select this vertex that's closest to the shoulder, and we'll lift that up into the collar shoulder area up here, and we'll do the same for the vertices of the sleeve. Now we need a few more edge loops to support the curves of the shirt. We'll select the Loop Cut tool, and then hover over the bottom middle edge of the shirt. We'll see a yellow vertical line cutting up through the shirt all the way up through the collar. Click to cut the loop, and we'll do the same over the upper right shoulder area of the sleeve. Click to cut the loop. Now we can go back to the Move tool, select one of the new vertices, and move it into place to match the guide. Do the same for the one near the collar, and our shirt shape is really coming together. The cloth simulation will have better results if the surface of the shirt is made up of evenly spaced quads, but right now each of the quads are taller than they are wide, so let's add some more loop cuts. Select the Loop Cut tool again, come up to the tool settings and change number of cuts to 2, hover over the sleeve, we'll see a yellow horizontal line appear, and click to insert 2 edge loops horizontally. Move your mouse down to the side of the waist where we'll see another horizontal line, and click to insert 2 more edge loops here as well. The quads are more evenly spaced now, but we really need a lot more of them for a proper cloth simulation. We can do this through subdividing. Go up to Select, choose All, then go over to the Edge menu, and choose Subdivide. For a really high quality cloth simulation, we need lots and lots of polygons, so let's increase the number of cuts to 6. If you're working on a computer that's not very powerful, you may need to use a lower number of cuts like 5 or 4. Now that we've got the front of the shirt, let's create the back. Orbit around so we can see a bit of the side of the mannequin and a little bit of the back. Grab the Extrude Region tool, and we can drag the yellow plus on the gizmo to extrude the shirt backwards. We can see how far backwards we're extruding in the top left corner. About negative 2.25 units should be just fine. We want to make sure that it's covering the back of the mannequin. That looks about right. However, there's a problem with the shading of the shirt. It's showing up dark when it shouldn't. This is because the normal facing direction of these polygons is inside out, so we need to flip it. Go to Select, All, then under Mesh, choose Normals, Recalculate Outside. And this will make sure that the polygons are facing the correct direction. Now we need to remove the polygons that are blocking the holes of the shirt. Go to Face Selection mode. We'll orbit to the bottom so we can see where the hole for the shirt should be. Then we can click and drag to box select the polygons on the bottom of the shirt. Go to Mesh, delete, faces. Let's do the same for the sleeve. We'll orbit the view and box select over the polygons of the sleeve hole. Mesh, delete, faces. Only one left. Let's do the neck. We'll orbit the view up to the top, box select over the polygons that are covering the neck hole. And one last time, mesh, delete, faces. We're almost done. We have the holes in the shirt now. However, we don't need these outer perimeter polygons either. These are going to get in the way of the cloth simulation. But instead of completely deleting them, we can actually leave behind the individual edges that run from the front to the back, and we can use those edges to sew the front to the back during the cloth simulation. So we need to delete the faces, but leave behind these edges. The easiest way to do that is to snap the view to the right side by clicking on the X in the navigation gizmo. Then we can turn on our X-ray mode by clicking this button right up here. With X-ray mode enabled, we can see through all the polygons, and we can box select over them, which will select all of them, including any that might have been hidden prior to turning on X-ray mode. Now we can go to Mesh, Delete, and instead of choosing faces this time, we're going to choose only faces, which will leave behind the edges. Now we're done with X-ray mode, so we can turn that back off. And if we orbit around, we'll see that we have the front of a shirt, the back of a shirt, and they're tied together with these edges connecting between. Let's change to object mode. Select the guide object either by clicking on it here or picking it from the outliner and choosing Object, Delete. And now we have a shirt mesh that's prepared for cloth simulation. To use this shirt for a cloth simulation, we need to set a couple of settings on the mannequin and on the shirt. We'll start by selecting the mannequin, and we're going to go to the Physics tab of the Properties editor, which is represented by this little blue orbiting moon. We have to tell Blender that we want physics objects to collide with this object, so we need to click on the collision button. We could adjust these settings, but the defaults are going to be just fine for our purposes. So now we can set up the shirt. Select the shirt object, and then back in the Physics tab, we're going to add cloth. There's lots of settings to adjust here, but we can use a preset by clicking on this button right here and choosing cotton. This will set all of the cloth physics properties so that it behaves approximately like cotton. To make sure that we get a high quality simulation, let's increase the quality steps from 5 to 10. Now I need to tell the cloth simulation to use these extra edges as sewing edges. Scroll down in the Properties editor, and under the Shape subsection, check the box for Sewing. To adjust how loose or tight the shirt is going to fit, we can adjust the shrinking factor. To make the shirt expand, we can use a small negative factor here. So let's do negative 0.05, and that'll make the shirt loose enough that some wrinkles will appear. Now that everything's set up, we can run the cloth simulation. Cloth simulations have to happen over time, so we're going to need the timeline. The timeline is this editor down here. We can see that this little indicator shows that we are currently on frame 0 of time, and if we click this button to play the animation, it will run the simulation. It's a good idea to save your work before you run a cloth simulation because they're very taxing on our computers and they tend to run very slowly. We don't want to lose any work if our computer crashes. Let's hit play to run the simulation. Keep an eye out for a frame of the simulation that you're happy with, and when you're ready, press the pause animation button to stop the simulation. In this case, the simulation starts to look pretty good at frame 15. Now that the simulation is complete, we can do a couple things to make it look a little bit better. First of all, let's give it smooth shading. We'll go to Object, Shade Smooth. Then let's go to the Modifier tab and add in a Subdivision Surface Modifier. We can leave the level viewport at 1, and we can reduce the level for renders down to 1 as well. And to give the shirt a little bit of thickness, we can add another modifier, Solidify. Let's have a look at the shirt. It's looking pretty good. It fits the form, and it's got some details that would have been difficult to sculpt by hand. If you're happy with this shape, it needs to be locked in by applying the cloth simulation to the mesh. First, let's apply the mirror modifier since it comes first. We'll choose this drop-down menu and choose Apply. Then we'll do the same thing for the cloth. One last bit of cleanup. If we look at the areas that were supposed to be sewn together, we can see that there's a little bit of a gap. A quick way to fix this is to change the interaction mode to edit mode, change our selection type to edges, choose Select, select all by trait, loose geometry, and that will select all of those sewing edges, and then we can go to Mesh, Delete, Collapse Edges and Faces, and that will collapse those sewing edges so that they disappear. We can change our interaction mode back to object mode, and the shirt is complete. To make a beanie hat for this mannequin, we'll start with a UV sphere and turn it into a base mesh that we can sculpt on. We'll go to Add, Mesh, UV Sphere. The options for adding the UV sphere will appear in the bottom left. We'll set location X to 0, location Y to 0, and location Z to 9.5. And that will raise the UV sphere up here to the head. Let's rename that object to Hat. And let's give it a custom material so that it can have some color in the viewport. Go to the Materials tab, hit New. We'll call the material Hat. And let's scroll all the way down to the Viewport Display section. Click on the color swatch. Go to the Hex tab so we can enter a custom hex code. We will use D677E7. That'll give us a nice purple color, but you can use whatever color you like. Now we can keep working on the shape of the hat. We don't need the bottom half, so let's go into Edit mode. Snap to our side view by clicking on the X in the navigation gizmo. Turn on X-ray mode by clicking on the icon right here. Make sure we're in face selection mode. Then we can box select over the bottom half of the sphere. Now remove these by going to Mesh, Delete, Faces. Removing these faces has left behind a hole that we need to fill in. Let's go to Edge Selection mode, then go to Select, Select All by Trait, Non-Manifold. And this will select the perimeter of edges around the hole that we just created. We don't need X-ray anymore, so let's turn that off. Now let's get a better look at the bottom of the hat by clicking on the -Z on the navigation gizmo. That's better, but the mannequin is blocking our view, so let's go to the View menu and choose Local View, Toggle Local View. And that will temporarily hide everything except for the hat. Now we can fill in the hole by going to Face, Grid Fill. Options for the grid fill will appear in the bottom left. Right now the grid is crooked, so we need to adjust the offset by clicking on this button here, and keep clicking until the alignment is straight up and down and straight left and right like a proper grid. In this case, an offset of 3 works, but this exact value may vary depending on the original orientation of the grid. Now that we filled in the hole, let's create some extra geometry for the rim of the hat. We'll orbit the view so that we can see the side, switch to face selection mode, hold down Alt, then we can click on one of the faces around the bottom of the hat to select the face loop around the bottom. Now we need to extrude this outwards. We have a special type of extrude tool stacked underneath the extrude region tool, so we'll find extrude region, click and hold, and choose extrude along normals. This works slightly differently in that it will push each of the faces outwards along their own normal facing direction. Click and drag on the yellow gizmo to extrude outwards, and a value of about 0.1 will be just enough for the rim of the hat. Now we're done in edit mode, so let's switch back to object mode. To leave local mode and show the mannequin again, we'll go to View, Local View, Toggle Local View. And we'll orbit up so we can see, get that framed up so we can see the hat in context to the head. The hat would look better if it was tilted back slightly, so let's go to the Item tab of the sidebar, and then under Rotation X, we will type -15. Press Enter, and that will rotate the hat backwards by 15 degrees on the X-axis. And it would look better if it had smooth shading, so we'll go to Object, Shade Smooth. Now that the base mesh is done, we can apply multi-resolution and begin sculpting. Let's go to the Modifier tab, Add Modifier, Multi-Resolution. Because this base mesh is so low poly, we're going to need quite a few levels of subdivision, so we'll hit Subdivide 4 times. Now we've got 4 levels of subdivision in the viewport, Sculpt mode, and in the render. Now let's enter Sculpt mode. Now let's center our view on the hat by going to View, Frame Selected, and we can zoom in a little bit. A brush that will help us reshape the hat to fit the head of the mannequin is the Elastic Deform brush. We'll click to activate it. Increase the brush radius so that it covers about half of the hat, in our case about 170 pixels. The Elastic Deform brush is very similar to the Grab brush. The main difference is, the rest of the sculpture outside of the brush radius is treated like an elastic material and has a much more believable fall-off when creating cloth-like materials. This is going to be great for creating the hat. However, I don't want to have to do this all the way around the rim, so I'm going to undo this, and we can learn to use a special type of symmetry to help us in this situation. Let's go to the Tool tab of the sidebar, come down to our Symmetry subsection, scroll down if you need to. The option we're used to using is the Mirror X, which keeps it symmetrical from left to right, but we want to keep it symmetrical in a circle. So instead of turning this on, we'll come down to the Radial Symmetry, and we need to pick an axis for symmetry to affect. In this case, we need Z, since that is the axis that runs up and down through the center of the hat. And we can customize how many points of symmetry we want. In this case, we'll go with 32. And now when we hover our brush back over the sculpture, we'll see that there's 32 points of symmetry surrounding the hat. We'll come back to the rim of the hat, just like we did before. And now when we drag, we're able to keep a radial symmetry around the hat. Radial symmetry will work flawlessly as long as the shape of the hat is symmetrical. Before we make any asymmetrical adjustments to the hat, let's take advantage of the radial symmetry and add in the classic woven stripe pattern for the beanie. We'll switch to the Draw Sharp brush, set the radius to something small like 8, and turn the strength all the way up to 1. Once again, we'll see that we have 32 points of symmetry around the hat, and we can use our Draw Sharp brush the same way we always have. Draw to drag in a line, and we can keep carving that in all the way up through the top of the hat. To sculpt this properly, be sure to orbit around while you're working. Now you may notice that the hat becomes blurry while we're orbiting around it. This is because the base mesh has very few polygons, and we have 4 levels of subdivision in sculpt mode. This amount of subdivision can make it difficult for your computer to show the high-resolution mesh while orbiting. So Blender has included an optimization called Fast Navigate, which toggles down to a lower level of subdivision while we're orbiting around the sculpture. But we don't really need it in this case, and it's just causing a visual distraction. So we can come up to Options in the top right corner and disable Fast Navigate. And now when we orbit, we'll be able to see the full resolution version of the model at all times. From here we can keep sculpting lines for the woven pattern of the beanie. That's looking pretty good. Let's crease the area where the rim meets the rest of the hat. We'll increase the brush radius to about 30. Then we can sculpt sideways while radial symmetry keeps the whole thing carving inwards. That's the final piece of radial symmetry that we needed to make this hat. We can turn radial symmetry back off by coming over to the radial Z setting and setting it back to 1. Let's switch to object mode and have a look. Looking around the hat, we can see that it fits the head pretty well, but it needs some asymmetrical details added to it, like narrowing it down on the sides, and we could add other details like folds of cloth as well. All of these subsequent details fall outside of the radial symmetry part of this project, so we'll call this section complete for now, but be sure to check out the bonus section for this video, where we take a look at how to take this hat design further with the sculpting tools that we've been learning up to this point. We got a really good start on this hat using radial symmetry tools, but now we can take the design a little bit further by using asymmetry and some of our other sculpting tools. We can enhance some of these details with the mesh filter. We'll scroll down on the list of tools, choose the mesh filter, make sure the filter type is set to inflate up here in the tool settings. Then we can click and drag to the right to begin inflating. We just need a little bit. Then we'll change the filter type to smooth, and again click and drag to the right to smooth out some of the problem areas. That's looking pretty good. Now I'd like to make some adjustments to the shape of the hat. For that, we want to lower the resolution of the sculpt mode so that we don't damage the high resolution details. I'll scroll through my list of tools and grab the elastic deform. And I'm going to turn on the regular mirror symmetry for the x-axis. Increase my brush size. And let's orbit around. And start to scoot in these sides so that it fits the form of the head a bit better. And this is the kind of area where you really can't over-describe what every brush stroke does. It's just kind of a matter of feeling it out. Kind of tapering it correctly there. Beanies tend to be pretty form-fitted, so I want to get the sides pulled in. Starting to feel better. I'm going to lift up this part here so it doesn't cover his eyes so much. This is all with the elastic deform brush at varying sizes. The grab brush would work as well, but for a piece of clothing, elastic deform works pretty well. All right. Now I'm going to try to flatten that rim a little bit with the scrape tool. We'll just start coming at it with these hard scrapes. And these scrapes are just going to flatten that out. Now remember, we've shifted down to a lower resolution, which means that we aren't going to be scraping away all those nice high-res details. We're just scraping the low-res, which will let me get this nice and flat. Actually, I'd like a lot more intensity on it here in the front, so I'm just going to push a bit harder. There we go. Again, benefit of a graphics tablet. We can push harder for more intensity. Yeah, that's starting to look a lot more like a beanie. And now I'm going to manually sculpt some cloth folds into the back of the hat. We can do this with the inflate brush. I'm going to turn to the back. I'm going to set the size to about the size of a wrinkle in the hat. And we'll make sure we increase the intensity all the way to 1. And I'm actually going to turn off symmetry for this part, because wrinkles are never really symmetrical. I'm just going to start carving in here some kind of lumpiness. Cloth tends to do these kind of switchback patterns. So as we come up one way up this direction, we switch back on itself back up this direction. And if we hold Control, we can invert the inflation, so we carve inwards a bit. Draw a line off that way. Maybe start to draw in below like that. So we come up to the top over here. Maybe do another switchback, but over this direction. Something like that. It's feeling pretty good. Carving back and forth. Kind of wrap this around to the front of the head a bit. And don't be afraid to cut in deep on there and really adjust the silhouette of the hat. So when we look from the side, we can actually see some of those wrinkles appearing in the silhouette. You can take some of these all the way up to the front, really make it look like it's drooping backwards. I'm going to smooth out some of those details. And this is the kind of stuff we used to have to do prior to the cloth brush being in existence at all. Okay, from there I'm going to grab the elastic to form again, just kind of sink the hat back into those wrinkles a bit, make it look like it's sagging downwards a little. And I'll try a little bit of the crease brush to help intensify some of these areas. And the crease brush is great for intensifying grooves. That's feeling pretty good. When we look from here, it kind of looks like cloth. Now that we're done reshaping it with low resolution, we can turn our resolution for sculpt mode back up to 4, and all of those details from the radial symmetry portion of this project come back. We can turn off overlays so we don't see this orange outline anymore, and we can admire our work. It's looking pretty good.